welcome to Veterans of the Valley. I'm Tom Turbyville. World War II, of course, was fought primarily in Europe and the Pacific, but there was never any guarantee that the enemy from either side would not find its way to the United States shores. Frank Buell got permission from his mother to enter the U.S.Navy at the age of 17. That was in May of 1944, just 15 months before Japan surrendered. While waiting for an opening to go to flight school, he was assigned as a bombardier, flying B-24s and later PB-4Y2s. Out of 24 crews, his was one of 4 assigned to stay stateside and train while at the same time guarding the East Coast from deployments, mainly in Florida. Please welcome Frank Buell to Veterans of the Valley. You're a 17-year-old kid and you were going into the Navy. That you kind of grow up fast when you go straight into the service, don't you?
Yes, you do.
Yeah.
You learn in a hurry.
But your mom had no qualms about go ahead and signing the permission and letting you join up at that time because there was a war going on.
Right. I found out later that she hoped I'd go into the Army because she didn't like the Navy and she didn't like the Air Force. And so I got both.
There's one irony in your story, as we talked about in the beginning. You flew on B-24s and then later the PB-4Y2s. You had previously worked at a company in Fort Worth, and you were a riveter and actually worked on those airplanes.
Right, Consolidated Volte.
Right. Yeah. And so that was ironic that you would later fly in those airplanes.
That's true. Yeah. I didn't ever expect that.
Let's talk about your service and sort of when you went in and sort of how you got to your final deployment or where you did deploy on the East Coast.
We went to Jacksonville for boot camp, and then from there we went to Memphis, Tennessee for Naval Air Technical Training Center.
Right.
And I trained as an ordnanceman and radar. And then from there we went back to Jacksonville for gunnery school. And because I had a good record, they offered me bombardiers training.
Right.
And so I went to bombardiers training in Cape Canaveral. And I offered to go to navigator school, but they wouldn't agree. So
right.
And then we switched to training for development, or going to squadrons duty. Right. Flying out of Miami Naval Air Station and flying down along the coast of Cuba and out south of Cuba on east toward Puerto Rico and back through the Bahamas.
Right.
So,
let's talk about that aspect of service during World War II, because most of the people that serve in the war, you think of them as serving in the Pacific or the European theater. Right. This was a very important aspect, obviously, of the war. Sort of, were you surprised that you were in the crew that was chosen to stay stateside, or were you figuring to go to the Pacific?
We were expecting to go to the Pacific. We didn't know until we were all lined up and he told the crews that they would have 30 days delay leave on delay to San Diego to go to the Pacific. We were supposed to go to Rota in the Kwajalein Islands or somewhere in there. I've forgotten now.
Right.
But at the end, he called off 4 crews and said that you're going to be going to the Atlantic and sent us to Norfolk, Virginia. And we stayed there for a while, and they transferred us to Edenton, North Carolina, to a Naval Air Station, and went into Squadron 214, which flew the coastline shipping lanes, watching for submarines and weather.
Talk more about that. What was the nature of your missions? I mean, you would go off, you wouldn't fly every day, but when you did fly, what was your job? What were you doing?
We just cruised the shipping lanes and looked for problems, weather problems or what have you. And we usually went out for either 4 or 8 hours. Right. And occasionally we'd fly as much as 12 hours on a longer trip. Right. But we would have certain sectors to follow when we went out on, depending on whether we went on 4 or 8 hours or whatever. Right. And we'd fly, carry a lunch with us. Yeah. Carry a supper if we were going out at night.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed.
And
Well, you talked about looking for weather, and we'll talk about that in a minute because you flew into a couple of hurricanes, which got kind of dicey. But as far as when you say looking for other problems, looking for enemy, looking for
Yes,
as a matter of
German
fact,
submarines.
German submarines.
Sure.
As a matter of fact, one popped up one time.
Yes.
Right?
Right off the coast where we're going to bombardier school. That one came up one day, and before we could get a bomb loaded on a plane, he disappeared again. They never did spot him after they went out looking for him. But,
Right.
Yeah, it scared us to death. We had to do guard duty on the beach every night. Some we had, let's see, we went on for 4 hours.
Right.
4-hour shifts, and walked the beaches carrying a rifle over our back, and that was sort of scary too. We think of all sorts of things happening
Exactly.
there.
Exactly. You flew down, I know, to Cuba, and there was some reconnaissance there because that's where some of the submarines were getting refueled and things like that. Is that right?
Yes, they had some creeks or little rivers where they'd run in under trees and do some stuff up in the trees to hide the submarine, and they stored gasoline or fuel oil there and whatever food they needed and things like that.
Right.
And they'd run out and catch the ships in the shipping lane.
Right.
As a matter of fact, the only ship I ever sunk was one that had been hit by a torpedo, and they called us when we were out on one of our flights and asked us to bomb a ship that had sunk down just almost to the level of their deck.
Right.
They had had some ammunition and stuff stored on it, shipping it to England.
Right.
And they asked us to bomb it and sink it because they were afraid to go back on board after the crew had left.
Right. Now, where was this? Where was it?
That was in just off Jacksonville.
I see.
Northern Florida.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So that was the ship that you saw.
Yes, it was a cargo ship.
Right.
Loaded with ammunition.
Right.
And
I bet you can remember that day when you dropped the bomb that sunk the ship, right?
Right. I dropped 4 right across. And
did you get them with all 4?
No. One hit the ship.
Yeah.
One hit right alongside.
Right.
And the others.
But you did the job.
Yeah.
Talk about the aircraft. The B-24, obviously a very high-profile aircraft of World War II.
Yeah.
And then sort of following it, a very similar airplane, the PB-4Y2, which was also called the Privateer.
Yes.
What are the difference between the two planes? And talk about the B-24 first.
Okay. I don't even remember now how long the B-24 was.
Right.
It was probably 50-something feet long, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Right.
Wings were about probably 24 feet each way.
Yeah.
And it had the twin rudders.
Right.
But
that's what's very distinctive about it, is the twin
Right.
rudders. And we'll see a photograph.
And they had a nose and tail turret and one top turret
Right.
and a belly turret.
Right.
And then you could fire machine guns out the side windows.
Right.
And on the PB-4Y2, it was designed to be 8 feet longer to leave additional room for radar bombing gear and some other gear that they needed to put in for long patrols.
Right. It had 6 turrets, right?
It had 6 turrets,
Right.
one in the nose, 2 on top, 1 in the tail, and 2 on the side.
Right. Right.
And they would sweep all the way down and cross about 40 feet under the plane, crossfire.
Right.
So
Right.
it was much better equipped for patrol.
And its tail or rudder was the more traditional, just
it
single.
was a single tail.
Right. Right. You like the PB better, right? As
Oh,
far
yeah.
as the job that you
Yeah.
had to do.
Particularly, and the nose. Well, the nose turret was a round turret that could go in the B-24. The turret could only raise the guns up and down, and it
Right.
turned sideways. So
Right.
you had trouble tracking a plane coming down across. But you could, in the PB-4Y2, the round turret, the guns moved with the turret, and you could go anywhere you wanted to with it.
Right.
And if you tracked a plane down and under or something like that, you'd wind up not knowing where you were. And usually the plane would turn when we were practicing that, and
Right.
turn away or turn into a plane that was coming toward us, and give more guns an opportunity to fire at it. But the gunner in front would get lost sometimes, and he could look around, couldn't see the airplane behind him because he was facing away from it.
Right.
And he'd have to just run his turret around to see
Right.
until he saw some part of the plane.
Indeed.
And
Indeed.
then line it up.
I know you told me that in the Navy that your missions were mainly single plane
Yes.
patrol
Right.
bombing missions.
We never went double.
Right.
We always went single.
Yeah. And you usually stayed under 5,000 feet or around 5,000 feet or even lower?
Generally, we were around 5,000. If we were running a bombing run or something like that, we'd go in lower.
Right.
Because it was easier to hit the target.
Right. You said sometimes you'd be so low you'd just be right over the wave tops because the submarines had a harder time seeing you that way, right?
We had a altimeter setting in the bombardier's compartment, and the pilot had his up above. And before we flew a flight, I always had to go check the pilot's deal and set ours 7 feet below his. His was up on the dash, and mine was down on the floor,
Right.
about to the side. One day we went out flying, and I forgot to set mine. And we were flying along for a practice run, bombing run, and I said, "Could you put it down a little lower?" I said, "You're up above 100 feet. Let's go down a little lower." And so he dropped it down, and the water started blowing up on
Oh my.
the bombardier's deal. And I looked over at mine, and it still showed that we were above water. No, it showed that we were below water. It hadn't been set, so but we were close enough so that the wind was blowing the water off the wave tops and catching the nose of the plane.
Right.
Yeah.
Most of the time water on the windshield is rain. This was ocean water
That was
coming back
ocean
up
water
at you.
coming back.
Most of your missions, thankfully, I would imagine were mostly routine, but there are some that were far from routine, and you told me about a couple of them. First one I want you to talk about is the time that you flew into a hurricane.
Yeah. Actually, the Navy had never flown into a hurricane before, and they had heard about an Army B-17 that had flown into a hurricane and reported the weather, and so they alerted us that any time a hurricane was coming up or any of the ships reported hurricanes or something like that, that they wanted us to fly into it if we were close to it. So they sent us a message over the radio that there was a hurricane just southeast of Cuba, or just south of Cuba.
Right.
And so we flew down and were circling with the wind and going into it. And at first it seemed not too bad. As we got into it a little deeper, though, sometimes we'd just drop about 100 feet or 150 feet. And first thing you know, we'd shoot up 100, 200 feet. And it really got scary.
Indeed.
Several of us got sick.
Right.
And with 12 members of crew there that smelled things up pretty bad. But we did go into the eye of the hurricane and then flew right back out again, and it was just as bad coming out as it was going in.
Oh.
But I don't know what the winds were because our equipment wouldn't measure them.
Right.
It didn't go high enough. And but we did circle all the way around it then and flew back in.
Yeah.
And we didn't suffer any damage, but it was just rough, really rough.
Really, really rough.
Really rough.
You said that was the second most scared you've ever been.
Yes.
In a little while, we'll talk about the time that it was the most scared that you were in your missions. Let's go to some photographs right now out of an album that you gave us, Frank Buell, and this is you and Gloria.
Yes, that's my wife.
On wedding day.
And That was in 1952.
Right.
We were married. I met her in probably October of 51.
Right.
And
when you all were at North Texas State.
we were at North Texas. I was working on my master's, and she was working on her doctorate in library service. And a friend of mine said, "Hey, you would like to go to the ball game this afternoon?" I said, "Sure." Saturday afternoon, I had a football game. And he said, "How about a blind date?" I said, "Great, sure, I'm up for a blind date." He said, "Well, I know a girl over in one of the dormitories, and I'll call her and ask her if she's got a roommate or a suite mate or something." So she had a roommate, and we agreed to pick them up at the proper time, and went over, and I parked my car, and we walked up to the dorm, and they were coming down some steps, and Gloria was 5'10", and I was a little over 6 feet, but she just kept coming down the stairs and coming down the stairs before we saw her face. And I thought, man, that's the girl.
That's the one.
That's the one. And so we met out in outside of the dorm. She introduced her girlfriend to both of us, and he'd introduced me to her, and then she introduced her girlfriend to both of us, and we talked just for minutes, and I just reached over and took Gloria by the elbow and said, "Shall we go?" and just walked off with her. And,
So you hadn't been paired up yet, but you made sure the pairing was what you wanted, right?
That's right. And he didn't like it at all.
And here some 57 years later, you've still got her by the arm, right?
Hanging, right.
And here we go. Let's go to some more photographs here. You're not in this picture. This is part of the crew, I guess.
Yeah, there's the master mechanic, and the middle one is radio operator, and the one on the right is also a radio operator.
Right.
And we had a bunch of pictures like this, different places, and that's me. But that's the way we went, dungarees and.
Right. Now here is the
privateer.
Yeah, here's the privateer. This is the
PB4Y2.
PB4Y2.
Yes.
And in the nose, that's where the front gunner is, right?
Yes, right.
And you're actually down below that. You can sort of see the shine of the windshield where the bombardier is.
Yeah.
That's pretty tight quarters.
You have to crawl in and stay down because you can't stand up in there. It's not enough room. But and the white deal down underneath was our radar.
I see.
Gear.
Right.
That we tracked planes with.
Got another photograph of the same same type of airplane.
Yeah.
Oh, that's the B-24.
This is the B-24.
Right,
yes.
right, with the double.
Yeah,
with the double tail.
we flew B-24s until the PB4Y2s came out.
Right, right. This is a photograph that I actually got off of the internet, which was a good in-flight picture of the B-24. And now here's another picture from your album, I believe, of B-24 that was actually in your group.
Right. That was in training to go on squadron duty.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Okay. Next one. This is crew.
That was a bombardier school, and that was a bunch of the guys that were in bombardiers training.
Right, right. And Frank is the back row, just almost right in the middle, the tall, skinny guy that's
dead center.
Yeah, dead center. You're standing.
No, just to the left of that front center line. Yeah.
Right. You're standing to the left of the guy with his hat that's cocked there. That's you right there. Okay. Now you're on the right on this picture.
I'm on the right, Crawford in the middle, and Briggs on the left. Yeah.
Where was this taken? Do you recall? It's been a few years.
It was one of our crew deals. I don't remember exactly.
Right.
But,
right. You were at ease, we'll say that. Right?
Yeah.
Yes.
We were at ease. You should see some of the pictures we had. Well, you saw some of them.
Yeah, I did, but you were really at ease. Yeah.
And there again, I'm dead center.
Yeah, in the top row.
Yeah, top row.
Section G of Class G8. This is from your...
Memphis.
Right.
Naval Air Technical Training Center.
Let's talk about the other time that was a rather dicey moment, and this one really was, and it involved a a flight where your normal pilot was on leave for
Yes,
personal reasons.
right.
And so another co-pilot had been brought in, and they were being trained to go from the B-24 to the PB-4Y2.
Right, yes.
And the co-pilot who was in charge pretty much kind of lost control.
Yes.
Talk about what happened.
We were doing various activities or various motions to show him how the plane handled different from the B-24. And he was having us to do a 60-degree bank. And we went up in the bank, and the co-pilot froze the controls. And the test pilot from Consolidated Vultee that had tested the planes whacked him in the head, I don't know whether it was his fist or something, and knocked him cold. And the next thing I heard, and I was in the rear of the plane listening to give them responses on conditions, and I heard him say, "Damn it, push the nose down, damn it, push the nose down." And then they whacked him, and we rolled over on our back. And the plane dropped off and started spinning around upside down with one wing lower than the other. And we had been told that if we ever went into a spin, that we would only last about 2 turns, 2 complete spins.
Right.
Well, I counted that, and it was gone before we ever got over. But the pilot finally got the plane over so that he got it going nose down. And we lost about 8,000 feet and cleared off about, probably about 400 feet.
Right.
And he knew the plane wasn't flying right, and so he just flew it right into the base and landed. We were just probably 5 or 6 miles out from the base. And
it was a scary moment, and the pilot didn't credit his own skill for most of that when you got on the ground, right?
we got on the ground, and he got out, and he said, "Okay, guys, let's kneel and pray." And one of the guys said, "Why? We're down." And he said, "We need to thank God we're down, because I didn't have control of that plane." He said, "God had it."
Right.
And he said, "All I did was to hold it for landing."
Right.
And he
when it was
said,
on approach at about 400 feet,
right.
that's all he had control of it.
That's right.
As far as getting it on course, aiming nose to the runway,
that's
that
right.
was.
We just happened to be lucky to be right front on into the runway.
Right.
And it just came in and landed.
Right.
And when we looked at the airplane, the rudder was bent over about 10 degrees. And there were parts of the tail and one of the ailerons missing off the plane.
Wow.
It had really been through it. So
There was another time trip, I think back from or to Puerto Rico, you said that a couple of engines went out,
yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Right.
we were flying, yes. We were flying back in. One engine went out. It had an oil leak or something, went out. And then as we turned to come back towards home, another engine developed a heating problem, and it went out. They're both on the same wing.
Right.
And so we were flying along sort of lopsided, but we flew into the Bahamas almost just before dark. And the British had an air base there, but they had closed their base down at supper time.
Right.
And so we came in over the island with a guy up front shooting a blinker gun, signaling, and the guy up on top of the deal opened the compartment up there, and he was firing rockets out. And then the radio operator was calling SOS, SOS, we need landing.
Right.
And we went over Nassau, flew just, and the pilot said, "Well, fellas, if we don't make it this next time, we're having to go in the ocean." And so he turned, and we came back in, and the lights came on just as we got over the island.
And it turns out a guy had just come out of a club from having his last beer, saw you all flashing at him, and he rushed over and turned on the lights.
And he ran over and turned on the lights.
I'm glad he didn't order one more beer.
Isn't that the truth?
That might have been a problem. Frank, we've just got a couple of 2.5 minutes left or so.
Okay.
And you got out in June of 1946. You were 20 years old. You went into education. You went to North Texas
Right.
and got your degree. And eventually you got a doctorate, I know, and all
Yes.
that. And you were in Carrollton for 20 years teaching.
Yes.
You also
teaching.
taught it.
Well, I taught all
Yeah.
the way through.
Right.
I was there 20 years, but I held almost every position in the school
Right.
district. And when I left, I was acting superintendent.
You taught at TCU. You were an instructional consultant all over Texas after
Yes.
actually retiring at the age of
Yes.
57. You met your wife Gloria at North Texas. You have a daughter Becky, and you
Yes.
have 3 grandchildren.
Yes.
And but one of your grandchildren, Wendy, and
Yes.
also wanted to mention you have a daughter Becky. You and Gloria also had a foster child, a
Yes,
daughter,
right.
who's
Mary.
Mary, who sadly you had to give back to her mother when she
Yes.
was young. But you have a granddaughter, Wendy, and tell us in about a couple of minutes, if you can, about how you came by Wendy.
Yeah. Jessica is our granddaughter, and
Right.
she was in the Girl Scouts. And so a church here in town was sponsoring an orphanage in El Salvador, and they got the girls to make up Christmas boxes for the kids.
Right.
And they got to look at the kids' pictures, and Jessica picked a cute little girl named Wendy, and she made up a box for her, and she stuck a picture of her and a letter and a Christmas card in it.
Right.
And then several months later, along in the spring, Steve was a builder, and they went out to see the building or builder supplies at the Brazos Center and different things that were there about construction and building. And he took Becky and Jessica with him.
Right.
And they walked down through the deal looking at things he was interested in, I guess. And Wendy saw the church deal there.
Right.
And up on top of some boxes was a picture of Wendy.
Right.
And she was holding Jessica's picture on her chest.
My goodness.
And so they looked at that and they thought, well, gosh, what a pretty little girl she was. And they got to talking about it. They said, you suppose we can adopt her?
Right.
We'd be glad to take another child.
And it turns out that after a long, long process that took a few years, it's a great, great story. But
3 years. 3 years.
3 years that they brought Wendy home.
Yes.
And
they came to our apartment.
right.
And Jessica came running in with Wendy, and Wendy just ran to us. And, abuelo, abuela, grandfather, grandmother.
And how old is Wendy now?
She's 10 now.
10.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful story.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful story. I know you love all your grandchildren, but that's a
We
wonderful
do.
story.
She's quite unusual.
She's special, bringing her from El Salvador. We're out of time. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for your service.
Enjoyed it.
Thank you, Frank.
Appreciate it.
Frank Buell served 2 years and a month in the U.S.Navy, involved in the all-important task of keeping our shores safe. He followed his military service with a career in education, which of course is one of equal honor. We salute Frank Buell for his service, as we do all veterans. I'm Tom Turbeville. Please join us next time on Veterans of the Valley.